The crisp morning air carried the faint scent of pine and wet earth as I drove up the winding dirt road toward my lake cabin. The mist hovered over the water like a delicate veil, reflecting the golden streaks of sunlight through the trees. For 8 years, this secluded paradise had been mine, untouched and unclaimed, a refuge from the chaos of the city. My small cabin, with its warm wooden walls and stone chimney, had been built with my own hands and my own vision. The lake shimmered peacefully, the occasional splash of a jumping fish breaking the silence. No HOA rules, no construction noise, no nosy neighbors poking around my property. Just the quiet whispers of the forest, the rustling of leaves, and the distant cry of a loon. Everything about this place was precisely as it should be, and for once in my life I felt untouchable. I rounded the final bend and came to a sudden halt, my stomach sinking. My cabin's driveway had been blocked by a new chain-link fence, shiny and freshly installed, complete with a bright orange padlock and a sign declaring, "Private HOA property violators will be prosecuted." And standing there in the middle of what had been my driveway was Karen Whitfield. Her blonde hair was pulled into a perfect high ponytail, her designer sunglasses catching the morning light, and her smile radiated an arrogance that could only mean she thought she owned the entire forest. She waved at me casually, as if greeting an old friend, and I felt my jaw tighten. "Daniel Morrison," she called, her voice echoing across the water. "You're trespassing on HOA property now. Everything beyond this point belongs to my son." My brain froze for a second, trying to process what I had just heard. My property, my cabin, how was this even possible? I dug through my glove compartment and pulled out my laminated deed, the one I kept for emergencies like this. Sure enough, the document was still perfectly valid. My name etched across the legal lines as the rightful owner of 15 acres, complete with survey markers, maps, and county stamps. This land had never, not once, been part of any HOA, not in law or in reality. But Karen, of course, didn't care about facts or legality. She stepped closer, clipboard in hand, her Bluetooth headset dangling from one ear. "I've personally approved this development," she said, her tone saccharine and commanding at the same time. "My company is already here, surveying and mapping. Your cabin? Gone. My son's plans? Priority number 1. I felt a cold wave of fury wash over me, but I clenched my fists, forcing myself to remain calm. Karen laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that bounced across the lake like nails on a chalkboard, and I noticed the smugness in her son's expression. He was barely 22, wearing a polo and khakis, grinning as he tapped away at a tablet, completely oblivious to the absurdity of his claim. "We're going to start the landscaping tomorrow," he said brightly. "Dad says this is all ours now." My cabin, my trees, my lake suddenly reduced to a stage for their entitlement. I wanted to scream, to tear down the fence, to confront them with rage, but I didn't. I knew my papers, my surveys, my years of documented ownership were solid. They had no legal leg to stand on, and that made me feel a tiny spark of hope amid the fury. I watched as her crew unloaded survey equipment, drones hovering over the lake like mechanical birds, stakes driven into the earth, and orange spray paint marking boundaries that were already mine. The irony was bitter, yet undeniable. Karen had completely miscalculated, assuming that entitlement and authority could override law. Every action she took was a declaration of arrogance, a signal that she had no idea who she was dealing with. As I observed the chaos unfolding on my own land, I realized that this intrusion was not just about property. It was about ego, about control, and about her insatiable desire to dominate. The bulldozer arrived next, its massive frame rumbling as it stopped just inside my property line. The engine growled like a beast, and I could see Karen's son hopping out, still grinning at the unfolding spectacle. He had no concept of boundaries, no respect for ownership, just blind confidence that his mother's words were law. I let him prance around, noting every detail, every misstep, every exposed flaw in their plan. It was going to be essential later. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to slow my racing thoughts, to channel my anger into observation, Every piece of evidence, every mistake, every arrogant move they made would become a brick in the wall. I planned to build against them. As I drove back down the dirt road, the smell of pine and mud filling the air, I realized something almost funny. Karen's company, already deep inside my property, was effectively trapped behind the fence she had installed without permission. They were on my land acting like conquerors, yet completely boxed in by their own miscalculation. My mind started working through possibilities, calculating, imagining, planning. Every detail of their intrusion was a mistake I could exploit. Every arrogant laugh, every casual gesture, every confident word was a piece of leverage. I didn't move in haste, but in strategy, knowing that the stage was set for the chaos that would soon unfold. By the time I returned the next morning, the scene had escalated far beyond what I had anticipated. Karen Whitfield's son had already begun staking out the lakefront, stringing orange tape along the shoreline, as if he had inherited the land by divine right. Surveying equipment beeped and whirred, and drones hovered overhead, casting shadows on the calm water like mechanical vultures. Her crew had started marking trees for removal, and the sound of their chainsaws echoed through the forest, a brutal interruption to the peaceful chirping of birds. Every step they took, every noise they made was an insult, a declaration that they believed they could rewrite ownership simply through presence. I parked my truck a safe distance away, watching the operation with measured calm, noting every misstep, every careless action. Karen herself arrived shortly after, sunglasses perched on her nose, clipboard clutched to her chest, and a coffee in hand. She walked along the newly marked boundary lines, talking animatedly to a contractor who seemed far too eager to follow her every whim. "We need precision," she insisted, tapping the tablet in her hand. "Every corner, every stake, it must be perfect. This property will be our showcase." I could hear the smugness in her tone, the same arrogant melody she had always used to assert authority over others, the audacity of her belief that she could dictate the future of my land without a shred of legal backing made my blood boil, but I remained quiet, observing. Every word she spoke, every direction she gave was a clue, a misstep that I could later use to undo everything she was building. As the morning wore on, Karen decided to escalate further. She began directing the crew to clear a narrow path down to the lake, insisting that her son's landscaping plans required direct water access. They moved quickly, chopping down saplings and brushing aside undergrowth, oblivious to the fact that each cut, each footstep, was leaving evidence of trespass. Her son pranced around, measuring angles and snapping photos with an overconfident grin, completely unaware that he was documenting his own wrongdoing. I made mental notes of every detail, taking photos from my vantage point, each one a potential weapon. The beauty of patience became clear. I didn't need to confront them yet. They were already exposing themselves in the most comprehensive way imaginable. Karen grew impatient by noon and decided to make a grand gesture. She called in a flatbed truck, loaded with ornamental boulders and exotic shrubs meant for the showcase garden she envisioned. As the driver struggled to navigate the narrow path she had demanded, the truck became wedged between two large trees near the water's edge. The engine sputtered and groaned as the tires spun uselessly in the mud. Her face twisted in frustration, and she barked orders, gesturing wildly, unaware that her son had taken the opportunity to step onto my dock to inspect the lake for the new landscaping. Every movement, every command she gave amplified the irony of the situation. They were trapped on my land by their own hubris, their grand entrance slowed to a crawl by the very terrain they believed they controlled. I moved closer under the cover of trees, watching the unfolding chaos. Karen's son had tried to maneuver the truck himself, slipping in the mud and nearly falling into the lake, while the contractor shouted in panic. The chainsaws, drones, and survey equipment all became a symphony of disorder, orchestrated by Karen's arrogance. Each mistake, each miscalculation was etched into my memory. I imagined how easy it would be to call authorities with photos and evidence of illegal trespass, of property destruction, of reckless endangerment. The beauty of it was in the timing. They were busy proving everything I needed without me saying a word. By mid-afternoon, Karen's temper had reached a boiling point. She stomped through the mud, her coffee spilling down the front of her designer blouse, yelling at the crew for incompetence, while barely noticing the massive orange stakes, marking her illegal encroachment. Her son, trying to save face, continued snapping photos, unaware that he was recording proof of every illegal act on my land. I remained silent, a calm observer in the forest, feeling the satisfaction of inevitability settle in. Every movement they made, every careless gesture, was building the trap I had envisioned, one that would soon leave them boxed in by their own ambition. By the next morning, Karen Whitfield's frustration had reached a boiling point. Her son was pacing along the muddy path they had attempted to clear, muttering under his breath about delays and costs, while the contractor wiped sweat from his forehead, staring at the wedged flatbed truck with a mixture of disbelief and panic. Karen herself was perched on a large boulder near the lake, glaring at the chaos below, as if sheer willpower could make the truck move. The drones buzzed overhead, capturing every misstep, while the chainsaws rested idly, the workers frozen in anticipation of the next command. I watched quietly from the tree line, letting the scene unfold like a slow-motion disaster, each mistake feeding into the perfect storm I had been planning for. Karen decided to take direct action, marching down the path with a clipboard clutched tightly in her hand. She barked orders at her crew, insisting they lift the boulders by hand and clear debris immediately, ignoring the mud sucking at their boots. Her son tried to assert authority over the contractor, only to be met with the mechanical failure of the truck's tires, spinning uselessly in the dirt. The irony was palpable. They were on my land, claiming ownership, yet completely trapped by the very obstacles Karen had demanded be moved. Every command she gave, every step she took, only made their predicament worse, and yet she remained oblivious. Consumed by entitlement and impatience, I slowly stepped onto my dock, camera in hand, capturing the moments in meticulous detail. Karen's crew tried to regain control, pulling ropes and chains, but the flatbed refused to budge, wedged firmly between the trees. Mud caked their shoes, sweat dripped into their eyes, and frustration reached a crescendo. Her son slipped again, landing in the shallow water near the edge, splashing and sputtering as Karen screamed at him to get up. Her shouting echoed across the lake, a mixture of panic and indignation, while the orange stakes marking the illegal property line glinted in the sunlight. Each movement they made was proof, each blunder recorded for the authorities, and every ounce of their arrogance had now become evidence against them. Karen, desperate to salvage the situation, pulled out her phone and started making calls to her HOA office, demanding immediate assistance. The employees on the other end listened politely before telling her that they were tied up with community matters and could not dispatch anyone immediately. Her frustration grew, and she stomped toward the truck, ignoring the slippery mud, the stakes, and the warning signs that littered the area. Her son followed, trying to assist while simultaneously documenting the land, oblivious that every photo he took was solidifying their illegal claim. The air was thick with tension, the smell of mud and pine hanging heavy, and every moment amplified the absurdity of their overreach. I took a careful step forward, intentionally brushing against a tree branch to make a soft noise, catching their attention. Karen spun around, glaring at me as if I had materialized out of nowhere. I smiled, holding up my deed, my surveys, and a notebook filled with timestamps, photos, and evidence of trespass. Her face twisted from anger to disbelief as she realized that the land she had assumed belonged to her son was not only mine but completely protected by law. Every misstep they had made, every careless command, every photo they had taken was now a weapon against her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, her authority evaporating under the weight of undeniable proof. The crew froze, unsure of what to do, while the wedged truck blocked the path back to the road. Karen's son looked at me with a mixture of horror and panic, realizing that his showcase project had become a trap of his own making. I started walking slowly toward them, confident but controlled, letting the tension build with each measured step. The drones buzzed overhead, capturing every motion, every reaction, every exposed vulnerability. Karen's perfect composure had cracked, revealing panic, desperation, and sheer disbelief. The irony was intoxicating. They had tried to claim my land, and in the process, trapped themselves completely, dependent on a mercy that I wasn't planning to give.